Favorites coming out the East and West. Utah continues to play well. I looked it up last night. I wrote it down as of last night. Let me get my notes out. They were 3 in offensive rating and still 5 in defensive rating. The Clippers are up there. I looked at it last night again. As of last night, they were actually 1 in offensive rating, 10 in defensive rating, which is solid enough. And then you got your Suns right there, 6 in offensive rating, 5th in defensive rating. So it's going to be interesting about the West. How do you see the West playing out once some of these guys, it look like LeBron's getting close, AD is getting close. How do you see all this shaking out in the West, and then we'll transition to the East?
Are you ready?
Well, I'm actually about to do a video series on my YouTube channel breaking down who I think can win the championship, and making cases, not necessarily who can win it, but making cases for the top contenders. So I've identified about 7 teams that I think, that have a legitimate case, okay? And 4 of those teams are in the Western Conference. And you've named them, the Utah Jazz, the Phoenix Suns, the LA Clippers, and the LA Lakers. So I think those 4 teams have kind of separated themselves and as far as their consistent play to be able to be a legitimate contender. However, the X factor in all of that has been health. And LeBron James, who to me is still the best player in the game, Anthony Davis to me, who is, in my opinion, top 5, some may say top 7, and maybe top 8 at least.
I had him top 4. Top 4.
Okay, gotcha. So you're talking about 2 top 5 players out the game for the Lakers, and then they've added, arguably, in my opinion, the best rebounder in the game of his era, Andre Drummond. So I look at the Lakers as still the favorites out of the West.
So you still have the Lakers?
To me, health is the only thing that's going to stop the Lakers from making from making the playoffs and from making the finals. Health is the only thing that could stop them. It's just too much talent, and I think one of the things that people are not, or maybe aware of it or not, is that even with LeBron and Anthony Davis being out, the Lakers still have the best defense in the NBA. And you're talking about your 2 best players, who are both 2 legitimate defensive players. Anthony Davis was number 2 in Defensive Player of the Year last year. They're gone, and you still have the number 1 defense in the NBA. And so when you bring those 2 guys back, your offense is going to skyrocket while you still have the best defense. I just don't. And then you look at the depth that the team has, which is one of the reasons why they've been able to play almost 500 basketball without LeBron and Anthony Davis, over this time period. I think there may be, I think it was like 13 and 15, or I think it's the average, or somewhere from all the games that they've missed between those 2. So it's close to 500 balls. So, I mean, the depth on this team, the defense, and then the supreme elite superstar talent, I just don't see anybody in the West being able to knock that off.
I think it's the Clippers that have the biggest threat. I think they had the biggest threat. I saw it last night for the first time, and that I saw it. I'm not saying this hasn't been happening, but I saw it last night with Rondo. Like the him getting the ball in the middle of the court, even though they lost, he was just making the right reads. Just the spacing was there. Kawhi was out. The issue obviously is, has Paul George finally recovered from those 2 shoulder surgeries? I don't think people realized that last year. Doesn't look like we have to do a bubble this year. The Serge Ibaka, who had was having a great season this year before he got hurt. Batum. They dusted Batum off this year. And then it comes down to your Luke Kennards and your Reggie Jacksons. And that's where I'm kind of a little nervous. As much as I'm high on Kennard, I think he's better than people realize. The Reggie Jackson, that kind of just makes me nervous. But Utah, in that 7-game series, Clarkson is your second leading scorer. Are we not knocking Clarkson, but you're relying on him in a 7-game series to be your 3rd option scoring the ball. I just don't know if Utah has enough, depending on who they get matched up with. And Phoenix, ultimately, it comes down to DeAndre Ayton. I hate to say that. He's like their only true role guy and the pick and roll guy. Can he stay healthy? Does he stay out of foul trouble? I just think there's a lot of unanswered questions from young guys in Phoenix, even though they had an incredible season. Chris Paul, to me, has cemented his legacy. I already thought it was cemented, but if you had any questions about Chris Paul, the player, whatever, he completely blew that out the water if you take last year and this year.
Yeah.
But to your point, the Lakers and Clippers, not even about the superstars, Hannibal, but it is about the superstars. People don't understand that. That's what it comes down to. And I'm not trying to begrudge Utah because they've had a great season and Phoenix, but I don't see them having enough to say, I feel comfortable picking them to beat the Clippers or the Lakers 4 times in a series. I just don't see it.
You know, last point on the West, I think that going back to the Clippers, because they are the biggest threat to the Lakers. Last year, there was 2 things that they missed, and I said that from the time that team was put together, and literally up until they added Rondo, they still were missing one of those pieces. But the 2 pieces they missed last year was that true facilitating guard, a facilitator, someone whose main role was to get others involved. Yep. Everybody who had the ball last year, whether it was Lou Williams, Kawhi, Paul George, Reggie Jackson, they were all score first guys. Yep. Nobody was out there trying to get others involved as their primary mindset, number one. Number 2 thing that they needed was a legitimate big that could defend the basket and stretch the paint, stretch the floor on offense. That's the Serge Ibaka role. So adding Serge Ibaka this offseason, I said, okay, now the Clippers they're going to be in the conference finals. When they got Rajon Rondo, I said, okay, now they're really a legitimate title contending threat. Then when they added DeMarcus Cousins, that to me is still an underrated move because they needed legitimate size. When you're going up against a Denver, they struggled last year because they had no size. He's not a great defender, but Montrezl Harrell was just too small. Zubac can only play but so much time on the court. So they needed someone with legitimate size. DeMarcus Cousins brings that. If you're going up against Joel Embiid, if you're going up against even with the Lakers now, which obviously will be their matchup, and Andre Drummond, you got to have somebody with some legitimate size to bang down there with him. And so adding Cousins, Rondo, like I say, if they get Serge Ibaka back healthy, that team is extremely deep. They're well coached. They have legitimate superstar talent. Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, like I say, even though he's coming off those shoulder surgeries, he's shown this year he's healthy. He's on that borderline superstar level, and they are the biggest threats. But at the end of the day, like you said, superstar talent wins out in the end, and especially when that team on that superstar talent is surrounded by defense. They got defenders all around them, and they have the ability to have depth so that you don't have to rely on them to be able to get all your baskets. And that's why I think a guy like Dennis Schroeder, a guy like Montrezl Harrell for the Lakers, giving them that. I mean, you got to think about it. Those guys are, at some nights, maybe the 4th or 5th scoring options. And these guys were both averaging 18 plus points last year. So when you've got LeBron and Anthony Davis, and then you also have a Drummond, a Schroeder, and a Montrezl Harrell, that's just too much firepower, I think.
I agree. So switching gears out east, I did a podcast a week ago. I got overly excited, and I was saying the Nets are not a super team.